כי נאמנים דרכי שלום, אתם שלום, ביתכם שלום, וכל אשר לכם שלום.
שמעו בנים, ניני קנים, כי נאמנים דרכי שלום, אתם שלום, ביתכם שלום, וכל אשר לכם שלום.
אמת תקנו, ביתכם תבנו, אם לא תפנו להבל כלום. אמת תקנו, ביתכם תבנו, אם לא תפנו להבל כלום.
אתם שלום, ביתכם שלום, וכל אשר לכם שלום.
אתם שלום, ביתכם שלום, וכל אשר לכם שלום. הללי נפשי, הללי, פצחי רינה וצהלי.
הללי נפשי, הללי, פצחי רינה וצהלי. שמעו בנים, ניני קנים, כי נאמנים דרכי שלום, אתם שלום, ביתכם שלום, וכל אשר לכם שלום. 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 וכל אשר לכם שלום, וכל אשר לכם שלום.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. Thousands of mourners gathered in Israel a few weeks ago with Rabbi Leo D. and his 3 surviving children as they laid to rest his wife Lucy, mother of their 2 surviving daughters, Maya and Rena. The 3 were shot and killed in an ambush by Palestinians in the West Bank near the settlement village of Efrat, where they lived. Tensions have recently soared across the region from a rocket attack from Syria, a barrage of rockets from Lebanon, tit-for-tat rocket fire from the Gaza Strip in Israel, clashes in the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem's Temple Mount, attacks in Israel and the West Bank, and a suspected Iranian drone launch from Syria. The funeral was posted by an old friend of mine who's an OBGYN physician, a gentle, observant Orthodox Jew who's brought thousands of lives into the world of all ethnicities and religion. Yet he titled his post in bold capitals, "Avenge This." He told me it was an often used phrase used for Jews martyred through acts of anti-Semitism. He repeated that these deaths should be avenged and wished me a good Shabbos, good Sabbath. I wondered what my friend's world would look like if his idea of a vengeful God wins out. So I've reached out to the prominent Israeli professor, historian, biographer, and columnist, Avi Shilon, to help us better understand Israel's complex and fragmented society and politics. Avi's main interests are in modern Jewish and Israeli history, with a particular focus on the Zionist right wing and Israeli politics. He's the author of the critically acclaimed The Decline of the Left Wing in Israel, Yossi Beilin, and the Politics of the Peace Process, Gurion, his later years in the political wilderness, and Menachem Begin, A Life. He's also teaching a widely popular course at Columbia University's Jewish Studies entitled History of Modern Israel. And in fact, a number of Israeli students at Columbia singled him out to me as the professor to have this dialogue with. That really speaks volumes. And I'm so honored and pleased and blessed to have Avi on The Radical Imagination for the first time.
Thank you very much. I could not expect a better introduction, so I'm
Well,
excited to talk.
I'm very excited too, and obviously you have a wide following too, not only among Israeli students, but that really piqued my interest because they said you were the one that we should talk to about this, and we'll get back to this, what's going on also at Columbia and your teaching there. So let's start with the question of what is happening in Israel. We are reading, the spasms of violence. We're pondering here in America and around the world, are we in for even more confrontation? It seems like you're heading down a very slippery slope here. So I wanted to get your take as a historian, as a biographer. You've looked at Israeli history. You've looked at some of the leading political leaders, and you're in the middle of this. So how can you begin to help us? Let's start as a biographer, as an academic here first. How does your work, about Gurion and Begin, and your writings about Netanyahu help us understand what's going on now in Israel?
Well, it's so complicated, so let's start, as you suggested, stage by stage. First of all, as a biographer, and let's start with the issue of Israeli leaders, we are having for the first time a prime minister who is serving more than 13 years in office. And this is only if you not include his first tenure, so he's more than 15 years in office. It's rare. I must tell you that I wrote a book about Ben-Gurion's later life and later years, and Ben-Gurion himself decided to retire by his own decision on 1963, even though he could continue. And one of his major explanations for that was that in a democracy, it's not good for any society or any political arena to have someone who will serve more than 15 years in office. Mm-hmm. And obviously, we have a huge problem right now with Bibi Netanyahu first, because he's serving for too long. And we all know the cliche, which is true, that power tends to corrupt over the years. And moreover, we have for the first time a prime minister who is being charged with allegation of corruption and breach of trust. And although we had a former prime minister that was sent to jail, once he was charged, Ehud Olmert, he immediately retired from office in order to handle his trial. Now, Netanyahu took a different path, and he preferred to fight in his trial while continuing being a prime minister. And this is very disturbing And moreover, is not only fighting for himself, he is fighting against the judicial branch and wanted to do right now a judicial reform, to lead the judicial reform, as he called it, yeah, while he is being charged with corruption. So the situation, I'm sure that you know that Confucius, the great Chinese philosopher, said that once the head is ill, when your leader is ill, once your leader is ill, the whole body will suffer. And this is one thing that put Israel in a very, very dire situation. If you mentioned Ben Gurion, Begin, we can argue about their policies, etc.
Right.
But they were very, very modest persons. And, Israel was built upon socialistic ideas about modesty, not about capitalism, money, and to be, I wouldn't say that to be corrupt was a shame, of course, but even to have a big apartment was a shame in the formative years of Israel. So we have a problem with the prime minister. This is for sure. From here, we can continue.
Yeah, I don't want to draw the analogy too closely here, but our American audience would certainly recognize traces, more than just traces of Donald Trump in what you're saying. I think if Trump had his way, well, he's already said that he would love to be president for life. So we're talking about arrogant, domineering personalities. When you say you're upset, as many of us are, of course, with what you've been describing here, it's obvious that great numbers of people in Israel and in this country would in fact like Netanyahu to stay on and to return Trump for as long as he may want to be in office. So both our countries are going through very divisive struggles here. Again, I don't want to draw the direct parallels here, but so what do you say? There are great numbers of Israelis who very, very much support what Netanyahu is doing. So is there a way out of this sort of confrontation that seems to be escalating as we look at what's going on over in Israel? It seems to be one more escalating is what I'm trying to get at here.
Well, I think it's no wonder that you mention Trump because Bibi throughout his entire life was some kind of a neoconservative.
Yeah.
And following Trump, he changed, and not only Trump, but mainly Trump, because Netanyahu sees America as the model. Bibi switched into a populist pattern of leadership. So Bibi of the last years is not the same of Bibi even of the 10 years ago. And the Israelis who supported Netanyahu, supported Netanyahu not because they believe that Bibi is innocent and he shouldn't be put into a trial. They supported Bibi because the neoliberal logic, which was installed into the Israeli society in the last decades, caused them to think that it's okay to have a corrupted prime minister as long as the situation of Israel is good.
Yeah. Economically, and that you felt more or less safe. However,
exactly.
We're going to have public safety, and we hear the same sort of argument here over and over again. And the demagogues using law and order to justify a growing police state. And again, with some of your writings too, the loss of power of a real true vision on the left. Isn't that also what we need to bring in here too? That the left, the progressive voices, have not been coherent. They've not been there, or they've lost their sense of what should be done as well. How do you bring that into it?
You are absolutely right. Just to go back for a minute to the reason for supporting Bibi, because it's important to understand that in the last few months, things has completely changed. So many Israelis supported Bibi, as you said, out of the logic of out of the neoliberal logic that if you supplies, if you can deliver, and deliver mainly means security and a good economic situation, it's fine to have a corrupt prime minister.
Yeah.
Now, in the last months, Israel is suffering from instability in terms of economy and security. So this is why I don't believe that Bibi will survive politically. Now, to your specific question about the lack of vision from the left, you are absolutely right. I think that the main problem, the main reason, let's put it like this, that the right-wing extremists rose to power in Israel is because it's not because that most of the Israelis are really supporting them. It's because the left has no story to tell, has no vision to put on the agenda, and when you don't have a peace process and the left is not socialistic anymore, he has nothing to sell.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. We
Yeah.
need a new vision. And I think that nowadays, in the last months, there is I would call it a burst of intellectual new thinking. And many Israelis in the streets, in their houses, are trying to think about a new approach. It can be a new party, it can be a new ideology, but something new should come from this unstable situation.
Well, we should emphasize too that we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that are taken to the streets, right? I mean, and Israel, still relatively speaking, is a small country. It's what, 8-9 million people. So when you have, you say, close to 1 million or 2 that are out there, you've got a very, very significant movement, or I shouldn't say potential for a movement. And that, as a historian, political scientist, it's got to be of interest to you, because these great historical figures that you've looked at in your country don't just come out of a vacuum. They come out of public support, and a true democracy reflect some of that. We go back and forth in this country as well. We could make the analogy of Bernie Sanders and his attempt to build a more democratic socialist movement, if you will. And quite frankly, he was done in much more by the neoliberals. I mean, that's no mystery here. It was Hillary Clinton who basically put the kibosh on his campaign there. And so it wasn't so much the right. So we're dealing with the right, with the neoliberals, who are, as I think you've articulated, willing to do pretty much anything to continue in power as long as they and are able to provide enough economic security for people and military security and so on. So again, there's parallels between what we've been doing here and what Israel seems to be doing too. But you seem in some ways to be, and ironically, ahead of us in at least getting these vast numbers of people mobilized out there. Now, what you do with that and where that energy is going to go, that becomes the real question, doesn't it?
You're right. It's a major question, especially, Bibi is trying to hold the judicial reform in order to calm down the protest. And it would be a challenge to the protesters how to continue while Bibi will retreat a bit from the judicial reform. But it is an important challenge because actually the protest in Israel is not only about the judicial reform. It's about something bigger that needs to be articulated.
Right.
And I think that we need to take into account that the former government of Israel, which unfortunately collapsed only after 1 year or something like that, was a very unique government. And it's no wonder that a right-wing extremist government rose to power immediately afterward, because the former government was very promising and very dangerous for many. It was a
That's so,
government.
Avi, I'm
Yeah,
so glad you brought this up. This is a profoundly important statement you're making. So please flesh that out so we can understand the fusion government that was formed. And I agree with you. That's really just expand on what you just explained to our audience. What you're meaning there. What was this government attempting to do? Who was involved in it?
Fusion is an excellent word to describe the former government, because it was like a unique experiment. A prime minister who is from the right, Naftali Bennett, but he came from a family from San Francisco, very liberal. Yeah, he is from the high-tech sector, but also religious with the yarmulke. He's with a yarmulke, but he married a secular woman, and they are having a traditionalist Jewish life. Okay, so this was the prime minister. Alongside this right-wing prime minister, we had the most left-wing parties in the government, the Labour Party, headed by Merav Michaeli, who put the gender issues on the agenda, and Meretz, which is more to the left. It's I wouldn't call them Bernie Sanders because they are less socialistic, but they are like the progressive left. Yeah.
Okay.
And and another right-wing party, which detached from the Likud because they could not accept Bibi as prime minister as long as he's been charged with corruption, but they are very right-wing, even more right-wing than Bibi in terms of ideology. And with them, for the first time, an Islamic party,
Yes,
a non-Zionist party, yes, headed by Mansour Abbas, who said that, yes, I'm a Palestinian, I'm a Muslim, I care for the Palestinians. I wish that somewhere in the future it will be a Muslim state. But for the time being, and when we are talking about the time being, we are talking about, the next 1,000 years, we should think about ourselves as Israelis. And as Israelis, we should work, Jews, Arabs, left wing, right wing. We should work together.
And then after the 1,000 years of this, then we'll talk about I get the point. We've had Dov Kenning on the show here.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with him. He's a Communist Party, but yet the only Jew within the Arab Bloc Party, and so on. So this fusion government, what you're saying in the sense is a bringing together of such diversity in a way where these diverse interests are having to work together for the common good. And the extremes, both on the right and the left, have been brought into some sort of cooperative venture that will really be the key to the survival of the country, of the entire region. This is what we need, seems to me. And as you pointed out, this is a threat. And so it only lasted a year. How come?
Because, we are living in an era in which it is very, very easy to put a lie on the streets, not on the street, on the web, yeah, on the social media, and address it as it's true. And many lies were said about this government very aggressively, and it was highly spread in the social media, in the web, and eventually, I think and this is one part, the one major reason to the fact that the government collapsed. Another reason was that they never talked about the major obstacle in order to make Israel better, and this is the occupation. The occupation eventually, yeah, this is the core of most of Israel's problem. And the former government was very good, as I said, but they tried to avoid this problem. Let's not talk about the occupation. Yeah. Eventually, what happened is that the government were in need to vote to extend the Israeli law or regulation over the territories, over the occupied territories. And the Likud, the right-wing opposition, said, we are not going to vote. We want to topple you. Even if it will make the occupation impossible, we are not going to vote. So the coalition, the former coalition, asked the Arab members of Knesset, who were part of the coalition, to vote for the extension of the Israeli regulation over the occupied territories. So it was like, an impossible situation.
Right.
And eventually, this was the main reason, the occupation, that the former government collapsed. Yeah, we can find a lot of other minor reasons, but I think that, and now we can go back to your question about vision. I think that the former coalition was a very good step forward, but it lacked a vision. It just gave us the blueprint for a nice coalition and for cooperation in the Israeli society. And the next step should be to have a vision. Maybe, by the way, we should utilize the current dispute over the judicial reform into a broader discussion about having a constitution to Israel.
What it stands for, right? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. In what way we want to remain Jewish, a Jewish state? In what way we want to keep our liberal values?
And what that means, and to bring in this variable here of, let's, for lack of better terminology, a spiritual progressive vision that has been lacking from the beginning, in a sense. I mean, the Zionist left, really, Gurion wasn't religious in that sense, and so doesn't that vision of the progressive spirituality of the world and the prophetic vision that Jews, ancient Israelites had, and manifested also in Jesus, who of course was Jewish and a rabbi, and in the more contemporary terminology with Cornel West's vision of radical love, or Reverend William Barber's attempt to transform the moral vision to be much more inclusive. And this is a way to get around and get to the point of my friend, and that vision of the vengeful God. Isn't that what you're also wrestling with? How do we begin to really have a more than just lip service here, but get to know people and feel what they've been going through. And again, so much tragedy upon tragedy on this. I mean, the horrible experiences, the suffering that Jews have had throughout history, but the understanding that they can't go back to bullying people in a way that they've been bullied, and that's not part of that tradition. And yet, some elements of that tradition hold on to that old vengeful God. So, if you can take off on that, that would be.
Yeah, you've mentioned Cornel West, and I'm a great admirer of him, and I believe in radical love. I think that the problem in Israel is that Ben Gurion was secular, yeah,
Yes.
but he was not completely secular because he carried the vision of the prophets.
Right.
And I think that in the last few decades, the left-wing camp or the liberal camp in Israel actually abandoned Judaism. It was like, if you are interested in Judaism, you belong to the right-wing camp. And if you are a liberal, you should be secular and just skip over Judaism. And we need to utilize religion. We can do a lot of good things with religion, yeah, in order to spread love. So I think that the left wing should embrace Jewish religion in order to talk about it as spiritualism.
Yeah.
I mean, when
Have you
Begin,
done that yourself personally? I'm just being a little personal here.
Sure.
Do you think that's how you've incorporated? Have you incorporated your life into that vision now? Have
Yeah,
you,
look,
yeah.
each and every morning I'm reading Tehillim, yeah, Psalm, because, and I'm doing a lot of things that would, how can I tell it, would mark me as a very non-religious, okay, yes,
Yes.
but I believe in the power of spiritualism, yeah,
Right.
and I think that for many years I truly felt that if I'm telling someone that I'm reading from Psalm, he would address me as, like a backward. And this was the perception of the left and the liberal in many cases. And once the liberal will embrace Judaism, just like, for example, when Begin made the peace process with Egypt, and he decided to give up on the Sinai Peninsula, many in the right objected him. But Begin was smart enough to utilize Jewish religion in order to justify giving up on the Sinai Peninsula. He said it was part of the biblical land of Israel. So by that, he utilized Jewish religion to justify concession. And I think, moreover, I'm a Mizrahi Jew. My parents came from Iraq, from Baghdad. And I think that the right wing today adopted, yes, but in a twisted way, the politics of identity. And by that, they are separating between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim.
Yeah.
The new protest, one of its beauties, is that there is a combination of Mizrahim and Ashkenazim, young and elderly, right wing and left wing alike. But I do think that the leadership of the liberal camp should be a Mizrahi Jew. Yeah?
Right.
I do think that identity plays a role, and it would be much easier to win good values if our leader wouldn't be Ehud Barak or this kind of people who are very Ashkenazi, very from the establishment, very privileged. And this is another issue that we need to fix.
Right. very, very interesting. I wanted to bring up, so the idea of a so-called greater Israel, because on the left around the world here too, there's often criticism. Well, this is part of, and as you know, your colleague in the Middle East studies programs, Rashid Khalidi, who could not make this show, but has written a book on the 100-Year War against Palestine, and has called it the colonial settlers' war and resistance to the Palestinians. So, what part does that idea of expansion that the left seems to bring into this to blame most of the problem of why peace doesn't exist on Israel? And I also want to tie that in to some of your experiences at Columbia University, and because some of the students themselves, the Jewish students, Israeli students, have said that they've felt uncomfortable in classes, in different classes, in various ways. But again, what would you say about the left and the forces in our country that seem to blame Israel for the overwhelming problem, and it's rooted in this colonial expansionist tradition? And Zionism is, however you want to clean it up, reform it, whatever, is basically about that.
Well, you know, I believe, I hope that my students feel comfortable.
No,
And
yeah,
I
they
don't
do.
like,
No, you were
no,
here. That's why they wanted. But no, in other courses that they've been taking, when
yeah, for sure. I heard
you
about it.
understand,
And
right?
I think it's a problem because it's not right and it's not smart to
Right.
blame Israel for everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Israel is obviously, I wouldn't term Israel as a Mr. Nice Guy, but Israel is not Mr. Evil as well. And Zionism is a very complicated phenomenon. There are some traits of settler colonialism in Zionism, yeah. But on the other hand, if I compare the Jewish modern nationalistic movement to other nationalistic movements around the world, maybe Zionism is the most justifiable, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Great point.
I
Yeah.
I I I I don't like any approach which is one-sided, and I think moreover, because in the academic sphere, yeah, there was no room for right-wing professors or not right-wing, no room for, you know, and I mean right-wing in the good sense of it. I mean, let people speak even if they are different, and no
Right.
room for someone who will tell you, yes, I'm very liberal. I think that I have a lot of criticism toward Israel, but I'm a Zionist. Yeah, and it's rare that it's mainly in the older generation of the professors. Most of them are very uniform, and I think that in my generation and obviously younger generation, you would be able to see more professors who are more open-minded to both perceptions, that you can blame Israel and you should also understand Israel. And I think the unique situation of Israel was smartly termed by Levi Eshkol. He said Israel is, and I will try to say it in Yiddish, even though I don't have the accent. Israel
Mhm.
is Samson the Nebech, which means Samson, very strong, but Nebech, it's like, you know, very weak, frightened. So the Jewish situation and obviously the Israeli condition or the Israeli situation is always a combination of, on the one hand, we are strong, on the other hand, we are very weak, and there are reasons for both feelings. So I do think that the study of Israel should be done with a variety of professors, not like today, in which most of them are from the same perception. And I do think that Israel should be treated differently than it is being examined in most places today.
Um, it should be examined differently than. So the Israeli experience, the Jewish experience, has similarities to other forms of exploitation and genocide and so on. But I'm curious as to what you mean by that last sentence there. Should be
Yeah.
seen as a different case study.
Yeah,
In
I will. Yes,
Yeah.
I will try to elaborate on it or to explain myself. I mean, for example, Israel is always been compared in the academic realm to the Western world, okay? But Israel is actually, even though it was isolated in most of its time from its region, Israel is actually a Middle Eastern state.
Mm-hmm.
And if you examine Israel in comparison to Egypt, to Jordan, to Lebanon, to Morocco, not to the United States,
Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
the Western liberal, you
I
might
see.
be able to understand Israel differently. And this is only one example.
Right.
And you know, you can explain Israel by uh, the Jewish history, yeah, which is true. But you can also understand Israel as a completely new phase in the Jewish history, which is also true. And these are just two examples for how we need to think about how to study and understand Israel. And I will give you maybe last example. Those who claim that Zionism is a settler colonialistic project see Israel as the white versus the Palestinian, the black. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the vast majority of the population of Israel are of Mizrahi, Middle Eastern origins, North African origins, not to mention Ethiopian. And I'm not sure if the Russian Jews, and today we have more than 1 million Russian Jews in Israel,
Mm-hmm.
can be termed as European or as white, yeah? If we take
Yeah.
colors as, constructed.
Right.
So there are many options to understand and to examine Israel, and this is why I think that the realm of Israel studies need to have some kind of a revolution in the academic sphere as well.
I really agree with what you're saying there. Do you see allies in the Arab world that would be open, academic and cultural and so on, that would be open to what you're talking about here, that would really, you know, invite you to teach a course wherever, Alexandria, Cairo, Jordan,
Yeah.
wherever? Do real politique? Are there places where you would love teaching this course and that you would be welcomed in that
Well,
Middle East region?
obviously, it would be a dream for me to teach in Cairo. It would be a dream for me to visit Baghdad, even to teach there, to see where my ancestors were living. But and I'm completely sure that if we can look freely, we can find many places in the Arab world that people there would be happy to join forces with Israelis to make progress. But I must be honest with you, I don't know. This is one of the pities of the existence of Israel, that we are quite isolated from the region. And even though most of the population in Israel are from Mizrahi origin, most of the population in Israel don't know Arabic, me included, because we were born and raised that it is better off not to know the language of your grandparents or parents and to have them going through the melting pot and becoming the new Jew. So we have the barrier of the language, we have the barrier of the political situation and the isolation of Israel that make it difficult to know whether I can find a lot of cooperation in the Arab world. But I'm sure that if I would be able to look for it, I would find.
Maybe we could find it in the hallowed halls of Columbia University. Maybe there could be a cross-disciplinary. I'm being serious here.
I'm all in. You just need to send me the invitation.
All right, we'll work on it. I know that I did attend. I've attended a number of events with Rashid Khalidi, who I find also in many ways just very wonderful, gregarious, and really knows his stuff, and a wonderful human being, and an open human being, an academic, and so on. And I attended an event several weeks ago on the legacy of Edward Said and Daniel Barenbaum. And there's another area. Now, let me just bring that up. The East-West Divan Orchestra, an ensemble that they created. Edward Said was the Palestinian scholar in Middle East studies. Daniel Barenbaum is the world famous Jewish conductor. They developed an orchestra where Israelis and Palestinians and other Arabs and so on played together and made music. Now, I found out at that event that the country where they could not play, where they were not allowed to play, was, unfortunately, guess.
Israel?
Yeah.
Okay.
That blew me away.
Yeah, this is very unfortunate, and I think that one way to look at what's happening in Israel in the last years is that we are adopting the bad instead of adopting the nice aspects of the Arab cultures around us. We are adopting the bad aspect of the political culture of the Arab states around us. Yeah. And the fact that Israel is the only place in which this orchestra cannot play and other issues are telling this is not the way that a liberal state should act.
Absolutely. And on that statement, we ought to work together, you and I, and we ought to start a movement. And I've looked into this a little bit. Sharm el Sheikh has a wonderful outdoor arena. I think there's a special, legislation or whatever. It's very easy for Israelis to come over. It's not that far, and why not have the orchestra play there? And this could be an emblem of what needs to happen, and where the peace movement can begin to see the common values that we do have. And again, at this event that I went to, the musicians did not really get into the politics, the political conflicts that they had, but they got to know each other through their playing of the beautiful music. And they established the sort of relationships which are the foundation for love, and the sort of radical love Cornell's talking about, you're talking about, that I think most of us want. Not the vengeful, never-ending God that wants to be forever killing one's enemies and destroying the world and so on, because that's what's going to happen. Oh, all right. That was got a little carried away there, but absolutely okay. Absolutely. So listen, we only have a couple minutes, so maybe we'll adopt the slogan here. Maybe next year in Jerusalem, but next year also in Sharm el Sheikh. And amen. Right. So look, in the couple minutes we have, give us your take on, as a biographer, again, history doesn't repeat itself, but there are always attempts to say it will. And that's, I'm sorry we didn't really get to that very profoundly important point that you talk about. I think that just as Jews can't keep, we've got to understand the Holocaust absolutely happened, it was atrocious, etc. But you can't live continuously your present life overwhelmed by that, right? We've got to think of new ways, as you put it, the new Jew, the new Middle East, and so on. So in the last couple of minutes, give us your take on that possibly happening and how it can be brought about, particularly in Israel.
Yeah, it's a good question, as all of your questions, and I think that as a historian, I'm telling this, it is very important to remember, yeah, but it also very important to forget, and it's not easy to forget. And when I'm using the term forget, I'm not meaning, I don't mean out of ignorance, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I mean to forget in the deep sense of it.
Yes, the trauma.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, the burden of Jewish history will deter us to make progress. And when Ben-Gurion, let's conclude with an historical outlook. When Ben-Gurion decided to sign on the reparation agreement with West Germany in 1952, one major reasoning for that was, of course, Israel was in need for the money. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Another important reason for it was that Israel deserved the money. Yeah, the Nazis not only murdered people, they also took their assets. So it was some kind of a compensation, if we could use this word. But another major reasoning for Ben-Gurion to sign the reparation agreement with West Germany, was to educate the Israelis, and especially the leadership of the Israelis, to calculate everything, to consider everything through the lens of realpolitik, and not through the lens of the Jewish history, which will put us in a situation in which we are always between salvation and persecution. And It's very hard to make progress from that standpoint.
Well put. Amen. We are over time, as two academics are usually do, but thank you so very much. I can understand why those Columbia students wanted me to have you on. Thank you again so very, very much,
Thank
Avi.
you.
We'll be in touch and continue. Take care.
For sure. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
It
was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And thank you so very, very much for watching us here this week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. being wrong. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. Time we stopped. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and they carrying signs, mostly say hooray for our side. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody